Well, I thought it was too harsh, but I wouldn't go to the GoFundMe page. I think Bob Kraft can handle the monetary aspect of it. I wouldn't waste my time with that. I don't think there's any question it was heavy-handed. I think, as usual, the league didn't explain itself very well. I don't think the severity of the penalty had to do as much with the crime as the cover-up. I think that was the bigger issue for the league, and I think that gave them the opening to be a little bit harsher than they would have been if it was just PSIs in football. And it is where it is. I think they set it up as 4 games, knowing on appeal it'll probably be knocked down to 2. And I think the more significant aspect is the first-round draft choice, because if you think about it, the Wells report, exonerated the organization itself and Bill Belichick, the head coach. So that's the biggest head-scratcher to me.
I agree with that. They basically penalized the organization, which includes the coaches and the front office staff, after you said they had no findings that they had anything to do with this, which is different from Spygate, where Bill Belichick was kind of, and the coaching staff was kind of implied that they had something to do with it. So they got fined or penalized the first-round draft choice, but you didn't suspend any players because of that. So to me, they got that off base.
Yeah, and a lot of contradictory, thought processes there because, on one hand they're saying, maybe the repeat offense aspect of it created the harsher penalty. But again, there's no repeat offense as far as Belichick or Kraft goes, at least for what Wells says. So you can't argue repeat offense as far as the organization goes. This has to stand on its own. And if it stands on its own, I think it's a little overblown. I've thought that from day one. I think you've seen numerous quarterbacks come out, whether it's Brad Johnson talking about, bribing ball boys at the Super Bowl after the 2002 season. Sean King, another ex-Bucs quarterback, just came out pretty strong yesterday and talked about how every quarterback, not most, every quarterback tampers with the balls, tries to get them just how they want them. Eli Manning, Peyton Manning was the one who pushed for this rule with Tom Brady back in 2006, I believe. I've talked to enough people in the game, and they've said from the beginning it's not that big of a deal as far as a competitive edge. So to me, it's the cover-up, and I think you can argue that, but you have to be more steadfast about it. You have to explain it better. And the league is very, very poor at explaining their decision-making.
I agree, and there's a lot of other instances that have been brought up. There was a time, a caller brought this up to me back in January, and then I didn't really do much with it. And then I was doing some research last night, and it turns out he was right. The Carolina Panthers and the Vikings used sideline heaters to warm up the football in the game, and nothing. They were warned, hey, you can't do that. That's it. The San Diego Chargers had an adhesive substance on the game balls in a game back in 2012 where they got fined $20,000 for that. So it seems that those, tampering with the football was not a big deal then. Now it seems to be a big deal, which tells me it's not the tampering of the football. It's the other stuff. You covered it up. You're the Patriots. You got caught before, and that's what we're going to do to you. You can't do this to us in the future.
Yeah, and, you're right. I mean, you can point to so many different things, and there have been so many issues in the past. You mentioned the Vikings heating up the footballs. They've done that in the past. And people talk about the lack of fumbles. I know people who are against the Patriots talk about the fact that they did not lose a fumble playing in their home games. But they fumbled 6 times. They just happened to get lucky, and they got on all 6 of them. That's kind of stuff when you're having a good season. It'll kind of sort of like the snowball going downhill. And that same Minnesota team actually fumbled the ball less than the Patriots did in their road games. So are we to assume that the Minnesota Vikings are tampering with the footballs? There's so many issues with this, and people like to grab onto one fact and make it fit a narrative. the bottom line is I've talked to enough players to believe, and they have no skin in the game. They have no reason to lie to me. It's not a competitive advantage. It doesn't make that much of a difference. And as I said, and everyone in Philadelphia can relate to this, if you give Tim Tebow the footballs that the Patriots were using in the AFC Championship game, I guarantee you he does not turn into Tom Brady.
John McMullen is the NFL editor, sportsnetwork.com. Now, here's another one that kind of throws me off a little bit. The NFL says the Patriots and Tom Brady did not cooperate. That's what they said, failure to cooperate in the subsequent investigation. That was in their statement yesterday on the punishment. Well, in the Wells report, it said the Patriots provided substantial cooperation throughout the investigation. So is this a sense of the right hand not talking to the left hand here, or, again, the NFL just wanting to make an example? It seems like there's too many opportunities to poke holes into finding ways that the NFL wants to make an example of the Patriots.
Yeah, I mean, and we talked about the contradictory stuff. I mean, Troy Vincent wrote that, he was very concerned about the fact that Tom Brady didn't, produce any electronic evidence, regarding emails, text, et cetera, things like that. Now, on the other side of the coin, you have to think you're Tom Brady. And, think about you, Mike, or me. If someone asks me for my cell phone, I'm not necessarily going to hand it over to them. There might be other stuff on there that you don't want somebody to see. And although the league claims that, they went to great, safeguards to protect unrelated matters, that doesn't mean anything. It could be one leak putting a picture of his wife online. There's a number of reasons that Tom Brady maybe didn't want to hand over his cell phone. Now, all that said, it's pretty clear he knew what was going on here. I think Patriot fans who are trying to turn things that way and proclaim that he had nothing to do with it are just dead wrong. He wanted the footballs a certain way, and he got them the way he wanted them. My thesis is that he's no different than any other quarterback in the NFL. They all have their likes and their wants, and Aaron Rodgers likes the football overinflated. He likes it underinflated. Peyton likes it underinflated. Eli has talked about how he likes to beat up the footballs during the week and get them broken in and things like that. To me, tampering with footballs is sort of a quarterback's version of a placebo or a sugar pill. It just makes them feel better. It's a confidence thing. It doesn't have that much effect on the integrity of the game, and that's the one aspect where I think the league was just way off base, acting like that was a big deal. Because if it was, why hasn't Brad Johnson been hauled into Park Avenue? Because he's the one who admitted, bribing ball boys at the Super Bowl. Why did the league acquiesce to Brady and Peyton Manning when they asked this rule to be changed? And finally, my last point would be, if the integrity of the game is really in the balance, this is the simplest fix ever. Everybody uses football straight out of the box, 12.5 PSI, but that's never been the issue in this case.
I've said that many times. I don't understand why the NFL would even have a plus or minus level of PSI and why they allow teams to supply their own ball. You don't change basketballs when you go across half court and say, hey, we want our ball. We want it to bounce a little chest high and you like yours waist high. You both use the same ball, baseball, basketball, and every other sport. The NFL did this to themselves by having this in. John, let's look at this then. I know that it's easy to say that there is obviously some sort of connection, it seems like, to Brady. But is there concrete enough evidence of Brady's wrongdoing to say, you know what, he gets 4 games because he generally may have been aware? Or it seems that there's too many generals and probablys. There's not enough evidence, not enough facts, maybe, to bang him for 4 games.
Yeah, I mean, the wording is kind of laughable at times. The generally aware, the more probable. You're trying to protect yourself in a legal sense, and that's just how sometimes these reports are written. To me, it comes down. I've been kind of harsh on Roger Goodell since the Ray Rice incident, and I wrote earlier this week. To me, That's his Waterloo. Every decision he has made, it doesn't matter what case it is, doesn't matter if it's personal conduct, performance-enhancing drugs. This case, he lacks credibility. And to me, this is an attempt by a commissioner with no credibility to regain sort of the moral high ground and, by playing tough guy against the league's, best team and its highest profile player. That's how I read this. And that's why I think the league was heavy-handed. And we'll see. Robert Kraft for many years has he's one of the most powerful owners in this league, and he's always had Roger Goodell's back. And to me, it all comes down to how he wants to handle this. Because if he's upset enough, the eventual end game here could be for him to push things. And it's pretty clear that if you look at the history of this league, if this gets to an independent arbiter, it's going to be overturned. If it gets to federal court, it's going to get overturned. So to me, the real story is, does Robert Kraft continue to protect Roger Goodell, or is he angry enough to push it in a different direction?
Yeah, and this ruling, did they make a ruling like this to show that they were heavy-handed with the thought process that this thing could get overturned and they did their job? I also find it a little peculiar, as you mentioned, Goodell and his credibility, that he passed this decision off to Troy Vincent.
Well, I think he passed it off to Troy Vincent with that in mind, that he could be the eventual arbiter on appeal. Because remember, the commissioner's office controls the appeals. And usually if Roger Goodell hands down the decision, he gives it to, say, Harold Henderson, who's basically been his rubber stamp over the years and just, upholds whatever he says. But letting Troy Vincent handle it, all of a sudden he can handle the appeal. And obviously he's going to hold up what Troy Vincent says. But, as things have changed, you remember the Ray Rice case, it went to Barbara Jones, who was a former judge, and she had a lot different takes. She overturned it because she's looking at things from a legal standpoint, and you've seen it in federal court over the years, whether you go back to the Star Caps case, you more recently, Adrian Peterson. The NFL does not generally do well in federal court because a lot of their policies are heavy-handed, and courts look at it and say, this isn't the way you should be doing business. But the league itself tends not to learn from those things.
John, let's look at Brady now. I mean, if I say to you Tom Brady's a cheater, is that accurate? I mean, how do you look at him?
No. I look at him as one of the best quarterbacks who's ever lived. His legacy is solid inside the game. I mean, there's going to be plenty of people who look at this and call him a cheater. Casual fans, as I said, who don't understand what goes on in the game. I've always said, and I've said it on this show, and the NFL NASCAR rules apply. If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. You mentioned a number of different things. You could go all the way back to the 70s, and talk about how the Kansas City Chiefs used to drain their field so Cliff Branch couldn't run for the Oakland Raiders. It was all icy outside the numbers. You can talk about Bill Walsh jamming the radio equipment against the New York Giants and Bill Parcells. You can talk about Parcells opening the old door, the gate in the old Meadowlands, when depending on who was kicking, to try to swirl the winds. More recently, you have the Bounty case. You have, Sean Payton gets suspended for a year. Some of these teams have been disciplined, some haven't. But as long as you've had competitive sports, not just football, everybody's looking for an edge, and Tom Brady's no different.
Yeah, and that's the big thing is, if your heart of hearts you believe that the Patriots were out on an island by themselves, constantly bucking the system, then yeah. But I have a hard time thinking that they're the only ones. The question is, why do they keep getting caught if other teams in our minds are doing things like this? Why are the Patriots constantly the ones getting tripped up?
Well, you have to look at what happened in the Spygate and remember, Jimmy Johnson, who had no skin in the game, admitted, the Patriots weren't the only team doing that. I mean, he's very upfront about that. It was Eric Mangini who was sort of scorned, almost in a mob mentality, turning on his old cohorts and explaining to the league. Similar in this situation, you had Ryan Grigson tipped off whether you believe it was the Baltimore Ravens. Some people do. Some people believe it was someone else. He, in turn, tipped off the league. It's always someone turning on someone else, and that's what happened. And the bottom line to me is success breeds contempt, and a lot of people are jealous of the Patriots' success. If you're doing these things and you're 3-13, nobody cares. But if you're beating somebody 45-7 in the AFC Championship game, well, that green eye of jealousy might start, itching a little bit. And I think that's what happened, to be perfectly honest.
Do you find, Belichick was kind of absolved of everything? He had nothing to do with it. If that is the case, then how much credibility and stock do you put in that Wells report? If you're telling me that Belichick had no knowledge of this, is that hard to believe for you?
No, I don't think it's not hard to believe for me at all, because I don't think anybody in the league looks at this like a big deal. Tom Brady himself, who I think, as I said, I think knew. I believe that Tom Brady had no idea what the rule was as far as 12.5 psi, to 13.5 psi. I believe he likes the footballs less inflated, and he told his guys to keep them less inflated, not with the intention on going under 12.5. In fact, I would almost guarantee he had no idea what the limit was, because nobody in this league knew what the limit was before this started.
That's a good point.
So I believe that Bill Belichick had no idea, mainly because I don't think he cared. And as long as his team was performing at a high level, I didn't think it was a big deal to him. So I certainly believe that aspect of the story.
And then the one thing that would be, why would the NFL put all this time, effort, millions of dollars to basically taint its Super Bowl champion here? I mean, here's the team that just won the Super Bowl, and you spent $5 million on this, and you've basically made this a circus all of a sudden. You wonder why the NFL wanted to go down that road. Yeah,
and that's where, again, that's just speculation, and I think it's been such a difficult year for Roger Goodell. I think he wanted to play tough guy against the Patriots, because it is, basically the highest profile player in this league. It's either him or Peyton Manning. Take your pick. So, people can't look at Roger Goodell and say he took it, easy on Tom Brady. So I think that helps his credibility a little bit. And obviously, the Patriots are an easy target because of Spygate. So I thought, I hate to paint it that way, but I think it's a desperate commissioner trying to regain that lost credibility.
And Ted Wells said it today, that people at the league office wanted to put a hit on the most popular player of the face of the league. Does it make sense? You wonder why Wells, would make that comment. I don't know what the question was in reference to that made him say that, but I'm reading that and thinking the same thing. Why did the NFL want to go after him? But I think what you said before, John, might be the most interesting thing is, does Brady say to these guys, hey, you guys know what to do. I need the air out of these balls a little bit. And these guys basically go drastic and take more out than the PSI allows you to, because you're right. Who knows that rule? I would have never have known that there. I would have just thought that every ball had to be uniform.
Yeah, and that rule was put on the books, I think, in 1940. So, it's been there forever. One aspect I've always talked about to people is it's a very fine line. You can talk about underinflating footballs, but if you underinflate them too much, all of a sudden it becomes a detriment to you, because the football's not going to get to the receiver quick enough, and it'll just die in the air. So it's a very fine line. I don't think this was a clandestine attempt to get the football at the perfect weight to make it that kind of competitive advantage. I think, again, it was just how one particular quarterback felt comfortable. And I think if Andrew Luck did the same thing and it was underinflated or overinflated, I don't think the Patriots would have cared. And I don't think it had any impact on that particular football game.
John McMullen's the NFL editor, sportsnetwork.com, for more on this story and his take on it. Check out sportsnetwork.com. Go to the NFL section. You can see John's piece on Roger Goodell. And obviously, plenty of reaction continuing to come in as Ted Wells spoke today. We'll go over that as well. John, always a pleasure. Thanks for your time.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mike.